Many people ask me the real secret to building massive wealth, and I always tell them the exact truth, but nobody wants to believe it. They prefer the flashy lies and the fake gurus selling overnight sports cars while the real money is made by being incredibly boring and unimaginably patient. Right now, the global financial matrix is experiencing a level of structural friction that most people are way too distracted by social media memes to even notice, while the administration is busy acting as a weapon of mass distraction with Space Force memes and juvenile internet squabbles. The real underlying machinery of the global economy is breaking. We are looking at a situation where the geopolitical risk premium is hitting all-time highs, but the equity markets are still acting like everything is perfectly fine. Let us look at the cold, hard math of what is actually happening in the world today. We have reports of American military assets going down in the Middle East and energy facilities spontaneously combusting from Venezuela to Israel. Every single time you see a critical infrastructure site catch fire or an aircraft disappear from the skies, you need to understand that this is a direct tax on the global energy supply chain when oil depots in Moscow or nuclear power plants in the United Arab Emirates are hit by drones. It is not just a military headline, it is an immediate inflationary shock that hits your wallet every time you go to the gas station or buy groceries. The reason this matters so much for your portfolio is that the government is currently using these crises to create a manufactured pretext for even more aggressive military spending. They are talking about drone threats near Florida and manufacturing fear about Cuba to justify keeping the war machine at maximum capacity. But the reality is that the bond market is the only part of this system that is telling the truth. When you see 10-year Treasury yields spiking to 4.63%, you are seeing the global financial system demand higher returns to compensate for the extreme risk of lending money to a government that is drowning in debt. Those yields are now higher than the highs that triggered panic back in previous cycles, and mortgage rates are inching dangerously close to 7%. These are not normal market conditions, and anyone telling you that this is just a temporary correction is selling you a fantasy. The market for interest rate cuts has effectively collapsed because we are now staring at inflation levels nearing 4%. The 30-year Treasury yield is hovering over 5.15%, which mathematically creates a funding environment that is worse than anything we saw during the Great Recession. This is the moment where you need to stop watching the political theater and start looking at the balance sheet. Donald Trump and his inner circle are constantly trying to manipulate the perception of the market by launching new trade boards and promising bilateral economic ties with China. But the market is becoming increasingly numb to these theatrics, because the underlying math is simply too heavy to ignore. When you have $39 trillion in national debt and you are paying more in interest than you are for your entire military budget, you have reached the end of the line for traditional fiscal policy. The arsonist is trying to tell you that he is the fireman, but he is the one who lit the match in the first place. Every single time a political leader tries to distract you with an AI meme or a childish name-calling contest on the internet, you need to assume that they are hiding a major failure in their economic policy. They want you to be angry at your neighbor or the political opposition, because if you are distracted, you will not notice when they debase the currency or inflate away your retirement savings. The average person is trading away thousands of hours of their life to earn dollars that are losing value every single day because of these exact policy failures. If you think that a trade deal or a new skyscraper in Dubai is going to fix the structural rot in the national debt, you are being lied to by the very people who benefit from your confusion. The institutional players on Wall Street are making 60 trades a day while you are sitting there wondering if the market is going to go up tomorrow. They are not guessing, they are reacting to the math of the Treasury auctions and the volatility of the energy sector. You need to operate with that same level of cold rational detachment. If you are sitting on cash right now, you are essentially losing money to the invisible tax of inflation every second that the printer stays on. The strategy for a 25-year-old investor who wants to actually build wealth is not to trade on headlines, but to prepare for the long-term shift. This is the time to build a bunker portfolio that consists of high-quality assets that can survive a monetary reset. You should be looking at assets that have a hard limit on their supply, because the government has no limit on their ability to create paper money. Smart macro strategists have been warning for years that this cycle would end in a total gut check for investors. That gut check is happening right now in the bond market. When yields start to break the system, the only way out is usually through a massive devaluation of the currency to pay off the debt with cheaper dollars. That is the textbook definition of hyperinflation, and it has happened to every empire in human history that ignored its own debt mountain. Do not think that America is somehow exempt from the laws of basic mathematics. Just because we have a strong military or a loud president, the math does not care about your political affiliation, and it certainly does not care about the memes on social media. The math only cares about the supply of money versus the supply of goods and services. Right now, we have an explosion in the supply of debt and a constrained supply of energy, which is the recipe for a persistent and painful stagflationary environment. If you are holding high levels of cash without a plan for when to deploy it, you are making a massive mistake. You should have your price levels for your favorite assets marked down on a spreadsheet before the market even opens. When the next flash crash happens because of some geopolitical event, you should not be panicking and selling. You should be buying the assets you want at a discount. That is the difference between a victim of the market and a student of the market. Most people will watch this video and go back to watching Space Force memes because it feels better to be entertained than to be informed. But you are here because you want to understand the engine of your own financial freedom. The world is changing, and the old rules of 60-40 portfolio allocations are likely going to fail you in a world where bonds are a liability rather than an asset. You need to be more aggressive in your hunt for value and more conservative in your use of leverage. Stop borrowing money to buy liabilities and start using your income to purchase assets that produce cash. It is not complicated, but it requires a level of consistency that most people simply cannot maintain. Every single dollar you do not spend on a status symbol is a piece of your financial future that you have secured. The political circus is designed to exhaust you and keep you from focusing on your own path. Do not let them win the game by breaking your focus. The reality is that we are in a massive cycle of transition where the old guard is being forced to confront the limits of their own creation. The central bank is trapped because they know that raising rates to fight inflation will kill the government's ability to pay its own interest. So they are forced to keep the money printer on even as the price of everything in the supermarket goes to the moon. This is the definition of a policy trap. There is no clean way out of this, and anyone telling you that there is a soft landing is probably trying to sell you something you do not need. I want you to be prepared for the hard landing because that is when the greatest wealth transfers in history occur. When the weak hands sell out of fear, the smart hands accumulate at a fraction of the cost. Make sure you are the one holding the assets when the dust eventually settles. Think about the true cost of your life because time is the only asset that you cannot replace no matter how much money you earn in the future. If you work a job that you hate just to buy things you do not need to impress people you do not like, then you are already bankrupt before you even started your journey. True wealth is the ability to walk away from any situation that does not serve your long-term purpose or your mental clarity. Financial independence is not about buying a boat or a luxury car. It is about buying your freedom from the grind that keeps most people in a state of constant anxiety. The media wants you to be scared of Iran and scared of Cuba and scared of Russia, because a scared consumer is a submissive consumer who does not ask questions about why their purchasing power is evaporating. But if you look at the charts and the bond yields and the debt to gross domestic product ratios, you realize that the real threat is much closer to home and it is much more boring than a war in the Middle East. The real threat is the systemic devaluation of your currency through uncontrolled deficit spending and the expansion of the monetary base. You cannot outrun a debased currency by working harder at a job that pays you in that same currency. You have to own things that are scarce and things that have intrinsic utility, because that is the only way to insulate your capital from the madness of the central planning elites. Look at how the elite move their capital. They do not hold government bonds that yield less than the actual rate of inflation. They hold real estate and precious metals and equities that have strong pricing power. You need to mimic that behavior if you want to protect your family from the coming storm of stagflation. When I look at my own financial data, I do not see political parties. I see risk and reward, and I make my decisions based on the objective reality of the numbers on the screen. I do not care if a president is a Democrat or a Republican, because both sides are spending money that they do not have at a rate that is mathematically unsustainable. You are the one who is going to pay for this, and you are the one who is going to suffer if you do not take action right now. Start by cutting your expenses to the bone so that you can allocate every single surplus dollar into assets that will survive the next decade. This is not about being cheap, it is about being efficient with your most valuable resource, which is your life energy. When you spend $10 on a useless subscription or a fast food meal, you are literally trading away an hour of your own existence for something that has zero long-term value. Imagine if you took that $10 and invested it into a high-quality index fund that would compound over the next 20 years. That is how you turn a life of labor into a life of freedom. Most people will never understand this because they are addicted to the instant gratification of the current consumption culture. They want the prize without the struggle, and they want the wealth without the discipline. But that is not how life works. And you know it because if you are still watching this, you are part of the small group of people who actually care about the truth. The bond market is the heartbeat of the economy, and right now it is suffering from a massive arrhythmia that no amount of government rhetoric can fix. We are witnessing the decline of a reserve currency in real time, and it is a fascinating process if you have the stomach to watch it unfold without getting emotional. The volatility we see in the markets today is just the beginning of a much larger shift towards a new global order where paper promises will no longer be enough to satisfy the demands of the market. You need to be prepared for a world where gold and energy and commodities are the true store of value rather than the digits in your bank account that can be deleted with a single command from the Treasury. Now let us talk about the specific military asset that is currently prowling the Middle East, because this is a perfect example of how the military-industrial complex turns tax dollars into fire and fury. The AC-130J Ghost Rider is not just an airplane, it is a flying artillery battery designed to obliterate any resistance on the ground with surgical precision. Think about the engineering requirement to keep a 105mm howitzer firing, while the entire airframe experiences massive recoil. That is the kind of mechanical insanity that keeps the defense budget bloated and the national debt growing. When the government talks about Operation Epic Fury, they are really talking about the cost of maintaining hegemony through these expensive platforms that burn through fuel and ammunition at an unsustainable rate. The Iranians understand this game perfectly because they are also using low-cost asymmetric tactics like their Mosquito Navy to drain the massive resources of the American military. Every time an AC-130J has to take flight to sink a fiberglass fast attack boat that costs almost nothing to manufacture, you are seeing the math of modern warfare work against the interest of the taxpayer. The regime in Iran is playing for time by using these diversionary tactics to keep the world focused on the Strait of Hormuz, while they continue their nuclear development in the background. They know that if they can keep the distraction cycle running indefinitely, they might just be able to achieve their strategic goals without ever having to engage in a full-scale conventional war. This is why you have to pay attention to the back-channel negotiations where the real power brokers are exchanging terms that never make it onto the nightly news. While you are worrying about whether or not a specific drone strike was a false flag or a genuine act of aggression, the real story is the silent erosion of the dollar as the medium of international trade. When nations like China and Russia start to build their own independent payment networks, they are telling the world that the era of American financial dominance is coming to a close. You do not have to be a geopolitical analyst to see the pattern of de-dollarization. If you just watch where the capital is flowing, countries are rushing to gold and other tangible assets because they no longer trust the long-term viability of the Treasury bond as a risk-free asset. If you think that your savings are safe because they are sitting in a bank account that earns a fraction of the inflation rate, you are making a fundamental error in your understanding of the financial environment. We are currently in a period of transition that will be studied for generations as the moment when the system finally hit the wall of reality. The debt burden is too high to be paid off with future taxes, so the only remaining option for the central bank is to inflate the currency until the debt becomes manageable in real terms. This is a hidden tax that affects everyone who holds cash or fixed income assets, but it specifically targets the middle class who cannot hide their wealth in overseas tax havens. If you want to protect your family, you must move your capital into assets that cannot be inflated away by a central bank that is desperate to save the system. Consider the reality that we have seen over 160 naval assets lost in recent conflicts, and yet the financial media acts as if these are isolated incidents rather than part of a larger systemic breakdown. The world is being reshaped by these conflicts, and the cost is being passed on to you in the form of higher prices for everything from fuel to food to basic survival necessities. Stay focused on the math and ignore the noise of the political theater, because the theater is designed to keep you from realizing that the show is ending. You are the architect of your own financial destiny, and the decisions you make today will determine your quality of life in the decade to come. When the dust eventually settles and the new order emerges, you want to be holding assets that have real utility rather than paper promises that have been devalued to zero. Do not let them tell you that the economy is recovering when the bond market is giving you all the signals of an impending system failure. It is time to take charge of your own data and stop relying on the mainstream news for your understanding of the world. Be the one who acts while others are still in shock, because that is how you build lasting wealth in the most uncertain times. The strategy is simple, but the discipline to execute it is rare, because most people would rather be comfortable and ignorant than uncomfortable and informed. Stay boring, stay patient, peace.